Welcome everyone to the pre-recording session of the online course regarding leadership for engineers, referred to as LA. My name is John Miparades. Just to go through some of the introductory parts of the leadership that is required for most modern technical people, and not just engineers, but also any person who has basically put a lot of their emphasis into doing a very technical task, whether it be in engineering, whether it be in production, whether it be in service, or whether you're actually in things like finance. But the idea is that it has the group of people who are required to lead particular teams becomes a ever increasing one, and also it does become part of a leadership and a personal progression. So the methodology that is available to go through and help the transition from a technocrat into a leader, or someone who can actually lead a team, is that we try to make sure that all the instructions, all the advice and all the points are kept as simple as possible. That we try to also go through a process of relearning, and that basically means that not that you discard any of the techniques that you have up to this point, but you actually are reskilling, and hence you need to go through a process of what is referred to as adult learning. Now, there are many different combinations and various techniques regarding that, but the idea is that we go through a specific process. We also go through a few of the applications that are very prevalent. We also try to make sure that you do have an ongoing commitment to the process, and basically allow yourself to develop by using the techniques, and by developing and using the techniques also be able to reinforce, and therefore to have fun at doing so. Okay, so the any type of adult learning should be quicker than the basic concepts that you have here that have hence previously gone through, and that's the idea of accelerated learning. Now, often you have to examine what type of learning process are effective at both adults and also and children, and they are two different things. There are different points in play, different psychological profiles, and basically it comes down to two things: either a cognitive method or a experimental method. Now, both of them will complement each other, and the cognitive method is basically a classroom type or a reference material type of thing, where you go through and learn from somebody else's experience on what actually has occurred, so and then go through a formalized process, or even a self-paced process, often one where you do have interaction, or you have an experimental, which basically you go through a very rigid process. And the reason why it is rigid is to make sure that you understand that you are creating an outcome, not just for the simple thing of doing the task, but actually creating an outcome. So therefore, you have things like setting up a hypothesis, or something that will test a hypothesis. It then goes through and works out the steps to test the hypothesis. So for instance, you wanted to test a hypothesis that all the people within your group are able to ride a bicycle, for instance. So And a hypothesis is that you need that yes, all the people in your team are able to ride a bicycle. That's a hypothesis. You then try to test that. You can either do it in two ways. You can either interview the people. In other words, giving a small questionnaire like saying, are you able to ride a bicycle? If they answer honestly, then you will get a conclusive answer. However, if you don't want to or are unable to ask that question or receive the feedback, then you have to do a physical experiment, say for instance, to allow them to get onto a bicycle or a simulation of a bicycle, and then determine the outcome from that. So and then the results that you collate will either go towards the hypothesis or either against the hypothesis. So, and that's why you get an experimental value. So, hence, using the infrastructure and the methodology, which is often known to you, will give you a quick way to determine an outcome, but also be able to go through the methodology. And repetitively doing experimental tasks will give you a good understanding of the process, but also of the subjects as well. So what does a facilitator do? Is either make sure that they have a correct idea for learning, positive attitude, climate, making sure that they understand and that the students and all the people trying to increase their knowledge know what the outcomes that they require. They have the ability to do the task, make sure that they organize the resources, the timing, the costing, etc. And basically try to make sure that there is a relatively effective balance between the aspects of intellectual learning, in other words, the facts, but also the implication of what facts they are and in how they're actually doing. In other words, what the emotional aspects of the learning are. Okay. So the assumptions of adult learning is that you do have a good understanding of why you actually are doing the task. In other words, it isn't just to obtain a skill set or a base knowledge. It is there to do rather applied knowledges. You need to understand and experience the process. So in other words, you do need to do something experimentally rather than rote learning as you would have in something like a secondary or a primary schooling. You need a more effective way is to actually try to practice skills after they've learned via a problem solving, and also not be fully involved in background work, but just rather than make sure that the task that you are undertaking directly relates to the value that you need from it. Okay. So there are the various classical models of learning, and could also be understood to be could also be referenced as understanding. So you have a level of unconscious incompetence. So in other words, you don't know that you don't know, and right up to conscious competence of the unconscious competence. So what that basically is saying is that you are aware of what you don't know, and therefore can then look at it. But the idea is that all the techniques are there to ensure that you have a raising of the level of the requirements in a particular subject or a particular topic, depending upon the stages which are well known in physical psyche. Okay. So, what does each one of these mean? So basically you start off with, and if you come up to a new subject, that you have what is referred to as unconscious incompetence. So in other words, you don't know what you don't know. So you have no skills, no mastery, no discipline. Then you do generally through a task-based approach. In other words, you try to do a small task, or even are given knowledge and then tested upon that knowledge, but the idea is that you go through a positive process on doing it and your assessment, and you become a conscious incompetence, which basically you are made aware that you don't know what you of the task that you're trying to do, or that the task that you are given is hard or is difficult, and you have inadequate skills. You then develop skills to become a conscious competence, in that you are the idea is that under supervision, under guidance, and you gain confidence in doing the task. You actually go through a process of the idea of gaining skills, and that's usually, that transition is usually under supervision. You probably aren't completely mastery. You need some guidance, and it is a fairly subjective path. But you are the biggest positive thing is that you do have a status that you are getting better. Then you are able to, so in other words, the conscious competence, you are able to think about it, you're able to do it, and then able to do the task. But with you need to be able to think about it, you need to be able to consider it. The next level is what is referred to as unconscious competence. In other words, it no longer requires a great deal of thought. You do it very quickly, very competently, and you have a very high level of skills. It almost becomes intuitive. You do it in a habitual way. You tend to look at tasks and their effect on each task. So, in other words, you get an understanding of the thing, and then you come to a conscious competence of how able to sense in other people whether they're not in they are lacking of the skills which you have learned. So, in other words, you become a trainer, an points of excellence. So, in each one of those, you will need to get up to a required level, depending upon the requirements of what you actually are going through. So, the 6 stages of the learning, and they are defined in classical theory, is that you have a stimulus. In other words, you wish to know a task. You then go through an evocation process of trying to understand the task. You start doing the process. You become you start to do inquiries about what the process is, what are the tasks that are required, what are the outcomes required. You then go through either through guiding or through self-paced learning, skills practice. In other words, For instance, if we take the idea of riding a bicycle, and many people do know this skill, but if you were to do it as an adult, then you would have a need to ride a bicycle. You would then find out through your stimulus, in other words, what are the tasks, what are the skills, what are the equipment that I need to actually do the task. Okay, and that then you start to work out: is it a task that I can learn myself? Is it a task that I need training on? Is it a task that I need points on? So that becomes an objective inquiry. Is it within my reach? Is it beyond my reach? Then, once you've decided, go down a certain path. So, for instance, the path is you wish to learn how to ride a bicycle by yourself without points, assuming that is possible. You start to do practice the skills. First, in a very safe manner, in other words, something that will not influence any other decision. And you go through it and start to, for instance, start to pedal on a stand. You start to then go through the various parts of how to balance, for instance, how to not hit things, not fall over, those types of things. You then, once you've practiced those skills, you then apply it in a real situation, possibly riding down a public road, riding down a closed path, whatever it is. And then you go through and try to make sure that you are up to a certain level. How quick you're going, what are the times that you think, do you, from a point to point, what are the, do you fall off, do you run into people? So there are criterion which you initially would have put in from the stimulus. So in other words, you wish to ride a bike down a closed road at a certain speed without falling off and without hitting people. So they're the criterion, and you then assess your outcome based upon the criterion and decide if you've actually achieved the objectives. So, yes, it is an important thing to go through and learn new skills. So what are the impetuses on an engineer, and what are the requirements as an engineer? In other words, someone with a technical skills, and as I said before, it's not just an engineer, it could be a production person, it could be one that is practiced at a technical skill and has to have certain values at a technical skill. But as an engineer, as a leader, you have to face an adjustment period, because it is a new set of rules, new mindset. Instead of being very concerned about the technical aspects of your task, you then have to consider about other people's considerations for that task. In other words, it could be that you are asking someone to do your previous task. So you have to guide them through, you have to understand their weaknesses, you have to understand all the personnel traits of them to make sure that they are giving them. So you also become the conscious competency reviewer of unconscious competency. So in other words, you are the master. So you have to decide which option best fits the circumstances. You take the lead in that. You need to be aware of, as I said, people's traits, how people react to various points, and you generally have a need to look at how to get as many tools applicable to you and available to you to do the task effectively. Okay. So there is a paradigm shift. In other words, you start off with working in a team, okay, to going to leading that team. Okay. So so in other words, the idea is that you will go to thing, and it is a continual process. It is not a step change generally. You should, through optimal understanding, go through the process and make sure that you do have the skills to transition through that process. But the idea is that you are changing your focus. In other words, you're no longer just concentrating on a technical task, but you're concentrating on getting the team to do that technical task, or even a task that you're not familiar with. But the idea is that the rules by which you have to be governed by are different. So your team relies on you to lead them through a task as you, as the head of that task, in other words, full understanding of it, and then drag them through. So the concept of the role changes. You need basically to understand fully what the old role is. Okay. So in other words, and this is often the case where a technical personnel or a technical, say for instance, an engineer who is technically very competent and also regarded as such in their technical task, then has to lead the team, so they must know the task relatively well. That isn't always the case, but as a technical person, you would normally, and a fairly high level of competency, you would need to know what the background is. So you would need to go an understanding of the process. Then understand where you fit into it. In other words, the concepts required by the new role, and then through a good planning, create a transition between the two. There will be different requirements on managing time, prioritizing tasks, but in a lot of terms, it may not be fully defined. It may be ambiguous in certain regions, or definitely if you are completely novice to this point, then yes, it will be ambiguous to you, and you need to work out the rule sets that apply to yourself and to others. But there will always be different goals to attain. So the new skills generally is that you will have a different skill set, okay? And it often comes through the understanding of the personnel around you. And yes, there are many different techniques and many different paths that allow you to go through the different parts. In other words, there are many different techniques used in management theory which will give you a better understanding, applications, various things, and we'll go through those in future webinars, also future sessions, as well as the online. And you need to really take, which is one of the hardest things often by technical people, is be able to delegate instead of being delegated to. In other words, letting go of your particular expert area and instructing people on the requirements of the task that they need to do. So it's a well-known fact that engineers who are usually set down a certain path have a difficulty in transitioning in that particular step. So that is a weakness. It is a generalized weakness, but often it can be overcome. So you need to be really a mindset change, including being able to let go. You have less direct control over your activity, over the activities of the team and the results. Some of the people who are leading you or are requiring you to lead them may have greater technical skills as well. So you have to be able to understand that and incorporate that into your plan. You may have to go through a self-evaluation process. It may be that you are always referring to yourself as a very competent technical person, yes, but then you have to step back a little bit and not just have the understanding of that, but try to incorporate a mindset of helping people come up to your level. Okay, so that may even come down to be able to finding legitimate ways to encourage people to do a task through a task. Like yourself, you have to remember that when you first started out, you needed guidance, you needed the techniques presented to you, you needed the encouragement. You have to now impart that onto other people, and also recognize you have to also go through that process as well. So you then have to set the goals of others. So the imperative being that you need to change, you are being forced to change, and whether it be through a promotion, whether it be through a new role, whether it be through a change of structure, but you need to make sure that the thing is there. Okay, so the business environment on a global level has changed. It's no longer a isolated case. There's generally competition that is globalized. There are fantastic and often overlooked developments of knowledge, technical knowledge. You may find that the institutions that you rely upon may actually not be there anymore. You do have the ability to change the people that you work with, and also who are instructing you, so that there is a demographics change. And you may also find that there is a leadership deficiency, and hence other people need to step in. Okay, so often there are a globalization of competition becomes an important thing. The information age, which is often referred to in the years that have come up, are leading to new markets, growth opportunities, opportunities for greater profits, opportunities for greater losses as well. Many competitors now see what used to be isolated, localized markets as part of a globalized point. You often may have to fight harder for the task that you have. In other words, there could be offshoring, could be various other rationalization effects, that the tasks that you are traditionally referring to and traditionally are used to may no longer be available. Okay, so a lot of different industries have a great increase in technical knowledge, and for instance, the introduction and the pervasiveness of information technology in virtually every aspect of endeavor, both be service, production, or manufacturing, is an important thing, and has driven efficiencies, have driven increased skill sets, but importantly, it also has driven the information transfer a lot wider than it would have been a field. So hence, you need to understand that the requirements of each of the people involved will be changing. Okay? Often they will be required to do new technical skills and new technical things. So you have to understand that even their replacements, which could be via automation, or it could be via the skills no longer being required by a particular thing because of a paradigm shift, then you need to do. Also, as a globalized effect, the aspects of loyalty become also a more tenuous point. And that is mainly not for the fact that people wish to deliberately break down personnel barriers, no, because of the requirements of the shifting of different points required different skills from different requirements from different points. So hence, you need to be able to have a far more flexible, accommodating task of workforce, because if that isn't occurred, then the isolation and also the obsolescence of the whole company could be affected. So you do change various demographics. Okay, there are different ways to do it, and in fact, the retirements also affect the thing, and this is based upon the in the Western world, a lot of the workforce had a large population increase, and that is now petering out with not the same type of replacement. Okay, so there, and one of the things that it does lead to is that the idea is that the number and the quality of the leaders become a very, very important thing. And because of the aging population, because of the shifting of requirements, because of the workforce not being stable in terms of staying with the same entities, then competent leaders become very, very short in supply. Also, you have the greater requirements of the diversified workforce. Also, that the scholastic system, the educational system, may be not as effective for your particular new tasks. Okay, that you do have a general, that the population does have a large gap in the strong leadership and people management skills of the graduates and also the personnel inside. And there is a definite need based upon those global forces, those local forces, but also those economic forces for a competent and highly skilled leader. So what is the most largest pool that many organizations take on? And that is that they have a good technical competency, because of the people with good technical competency, because they do have the product, the service, the production operation knowledge. They are then promoted, encouraged to take in larger roles. Okay. So in summary, the demand for leaders and the leaders leaving, as well as the supply of leaders, leads to a leadership gap. Okay, so now a good understanding of the word leader becomes a very important thing. So what is leadership? It's the ability to get things done with a group of people, yes, and often the term leading and managing, in other words, a manager or a leader, are often interchanged. However, a manager, by classical definition, will give you the ability to keep the status quo. In other words, they will manage a particular team to do the tasks that they are given, and they will do it competently, but the idea is to keep it on a day-to-day basis thing. Now, for a leader, and this is where the extra part is required, is a leader will recognize that the team or the task has to evolve, has to develop, and being able to develop, in other words, to put a value or a method of change. Not just keep the same task day in and day out, but be able to change. And by changing, also be able to motivate their team to create a new workplace, a new skill set, a new understanding of the process. And motivating the team is that point. But also making sure that they do have the correct equipment in doing so. In other words, they do have the correct infrastructure. They do have the technical tools to do it. They do have the knowledge. They do have the support structures to do it. So, but the big thing is making sure that you know where the goal is, that you have a vision for the goal. You then go through the development of the team, motivating the team, and make sure they equip it to get that particular point. Not just status quo, but in other words, not just continuing to do the same task and the same objectives, but changing them to make sure that they are more effective and, to a lesser extent, more efficient. Okay, so the difference between, as I said before, that the management and leadership is that you concentrate on people. In other words, making sure that you are able to guide and motivate them through, instead of just about the management of things. That you do have effectiveness rather than efficiency, as I mentioned before. You're rather a programmer than a program. Okay, you tend to have a good understanding of the direction where you're going, rather than just making it efficient and going the same direction. Okay, and the summary could be: is the ladder against the right wall, rather than climbing the ladder first? Thank you very much for your attention.